story begins, and we find ourselves on the streets of a bustling city. As the police patrol the area, a woman suddenly calls out to them, informing them that a young lady in the alleyway might be in trouble. The male police officer appears cheerful and assures the woman that they'll make sure to investigate the situation. These officers are supposed to be the protectors of the people, and because of this, the lady takes his word for it and leaves the scene, trusting that they will take care of the situation. The moment the woman leaves, the male officer's countenance changes, and that cheerful demeanor disappears. He suggests to his partner that they clock out for the day, and she's shocked to hear him say that. She points to the direction where the hoodlums are harassing the girl, and wonders if he just wants them to ignore it, even though it's pretty obvious that the girl needs their help. The male officer claims that they won't be able to help the girl because they're just two people, and the thugs outnumber them greatly. Initially, the female officer doesn't understand what he's saying, but he makes her believe that they can't do anything to help the girl. As the gang leader restrains the girl, the female officer suggests that they call for backup since they're outnumbered, but her corrupt partner claims that the men will let her go after they've had their fun with her. He tells her that he's seen many cases like this and knows how it always plays out. That's when a loud voice from outside suddenly cuts him off, and we see that it belongs to another policeman, who's telling the thugs to let go of the girl. The previous cops look out the window and see the mysterious fellow standing in front of the men. The gang leader also turns to look at the cop and is rather unfazed to see him. He wonders who the guy is, and the cop just demands that they let her go. Enraged, the gang leader shoves the girl out of the way and decides to confront the officer by himself. He tries to intimidate and taunt the officer, blowing smoke in his face and challenging him to see what would happen if he refused. Unfortunately for him, before he can finish his statement, the officer slams his jaw with his palm from below. The cigarette in his mouth is sent flying out, as the massive impact causes him to spit blood. This results in the gang leader falling to the ground and grabbing his nose in pain. Even the other cops in the car are shocked to see something like this, and the girl and the other thugs can hardly believe their eyes. The hero cop stands over the gang leader and answers his annoying question from earlier, telling him that he would have to give them a good beating if they don't want to let go of the girl. The officer rubs his wrist, and the gang leader curses at him from the floor. The man then suddenly gets up and charges at the officer, trying to attack him. However, before he can do anything, the hero lands a brutal punch right in his face. Once again, the power from the hit is so much that the guy is sent flying as even more blood spews out of his mouth. Just like the first time, the cops in the car are dumbfounded as they see this officer single-handedly take on and knead up all the goons. The gang leader falls to the ground groaning in pain, while all of his men have been knocked and covered in their own blood. Even though it's already pretty obvious that he can't win against this super cop, the thug refuses to give up. He curses at the officer again and pulls out a knife from his jacket, holding it menacingly to threaten the brave officer. The girl who is formerly their hostage covers her mouth and shrieks in terror as the relentless gang leader prepares to go for another round. The officer just smiles seeing this and taunts the man for thinking he could kill him. He insinuates that the man has never killed anyone before. And even though the angry mobster states that he has, the officer just taunts him some more, calling him a liar. The fearless cop looks him in the eye and tells him that he doesn't have any blood on his hands. He even holds the man's hand and reveals that he can see it in his eyes. At this point, the gang leader is beyond offended that the officer would think he isn't capable of killing him, but the cop simply tells him to go ahead and prove him wrong. He holds the man's hand and pulls the knife closer to his chest, urging the guy to stab him. It turns out that his instincts were correct, because the thug suddenly starts to look afraid. The cop makes things a lot harder for the terrified mobster when he promises to kill him if he's unable to prove him wrong. Hearing this, the gang leader is so scared that he drops the knife and starts to take a few steps back. The cop advances toward him, and the mobster fearfully asks him of his identity. In response, the officer just places his hand on the man's shoulder, and as he digs his fingers in, he tells him that he's the person who's going to throw them in jail. As the gang leader starts screaming in pain, the cop just casually adjusts his hat and smiles, introducing himself as a simple police officer. This is where we see a flashback from 1 week before the entire incident. At the engine port, a man in a suit goes toward one of the containers and opens it. Inside, we see a group of men armed with knives and axes, and the man from earlier is pleased to see that everyone is already present. This red-eyed man is actually a killer just like the rest, and he goes by the codename Biguang. One of the other killers starts laughing and asks Biguang why he took so long to arrive. This cheerful fellow's codename is Maple Leaf. Maple Leaf asks Biguang if he isn't a bit too relaxed since it's his final mission, but the latter just insists that he isn't late. He then asks what kind of mission they're currently on, and after a brief pause, Maple Leaf tells him that someone named Buddha insists that they work together. Biguang is surprised to hear this, and just then, someone sneaks up behind him and tries to strangle him with a chain. Unfortunately for the guy, Biguang has very sharp reflexes, and he quickly stops the chain before it can wrap around his neck. His eyes start glowing as he skillfully pulls the big dude with the chain, and tosses him on the ground. Enraged, he turns to Maple Leaf and demands to know what they're trying to do and what's going on. He wraps the chain around his hand in preparation for an intense fight, and at the same time, Maple Leaf tells him that he's just doing his job. Leafy and the rest of the men suddenly get up, and Biguang quickly realizes that he's been set up for a trap when the jovial killer tells him that this mission is the retirement ceremony of his legend. In other words, they're going to kill him. The other killers don't even skip a beat before charging at him with their sharp weapons, and our hero braces himself for the fight and skillfully uses the chain to grab the first guy by the neck. And then, he pulls him in for a deadly knee to the face. The second killer attempts to hit him with an axe, but Guang sees him coming and quickly dodges before landing a powerful kick on the side of the guy's neck. It doesn't take long before Biguang is surrounded and forced to take on all the men at the same time. But still, he skillfully dodges their attacks and uses the chain to choke them out. After knocking out the last guy, our hero holds him up by the shirt and asks Maple Leaf if he really thought they would be enough to take him down. He then drops the guy onto the floor where the other fighters are lying unconscious. With the way Maple Leaf smiles all the time, one would think he's the Joker's distant cousin or something. The smiling killer casually pulls out a gun and points it at Biguang as if he doesn't even want to use it. He tells the legendary killer that these are Buddha's orders and suggests that he make things easier for him and die already, since he's already injured pretty badly. Maple Leaf says this, reminding him that it's usually messy after using a gun. On the other hand, our hero is more concerned about the fact that Buddha was the one who ordered the hit on him. It's almost like he can't believe it. When the reality finally hits him, he's fuming with rage. You see, this Buddha person had told him that he would be free to do whatever he wanted after his so-called final mission, and our hero actually believed him. Biguang wonders why the man would want to kill him, and Maple Leaf just responds that he can ask such questions in hell. After that, the hired assassin tells Biguang the final goodbye as he pulls the trigger. Our hero tries to stop him, but all we see is a blood stain and smoke coming from the gun. The scene shifts, and we see a man praying to a Buddha statue in a temple, where he's interrupted by a phone call. The man picks up the phone, and immediately asks the person on the other end if he's done with the mission. Apparently, he's the mastermind behind our hero's assassination that Leafy was talking about. The person on the phone tells him that it's done and taken care of, but when he hears the voice, Buddha knows that he's talking to the wrong person. In a surprising twist, it turns out that Biguang managed to turn things around, and shot Maple Leaf in the head instead. Our hero insults Buddha on the phone, and the latter realizes who he's talking to. The mastermind tells our guy that he was just preparing funeral procedures, and asks him how he knew they were for him. Hearing this, Biguang asks Buddha if he's currently at the temple. In response, the man reminds him that he's a monk, which naturally means that he's always at the temple. He knows that our hero is probably going to try and kill him, but he just asks the killer if he thinks he can make it to the temple without getting killed. Buddha seems pretty invincible at the moment, because he knows he has many armed killers outside the temple, who are determined to lay their lives for him if he gives them the order. However, Biguang is even more confident that he can get to the monk, because he just casually tells him to keep the doors open for him and not worry about the rest. Our guy then reveals that he's already standing outside the temple, and as he drops the phone to the floor, he tells Buddha that he'll invite himself inside even if the monk doesn't want to. After ending the phone call, Biguang walks toward the other killers guarding the temple. The huge guard there stops him from entering, and tells him that Buddha is currently in the middle of funeral preparations. Hearing this, our hero just scoffs and spits on the mastermind's name, claiming that a true Buddha wouldn't kidnap kids and turn them into assassins to make himself rich. The huge guard is enraged upon hearing him insult his master, and it's evident when he grips his axe even harder. After a short moment of silence, the big guy finally raises his axe and attempts to lay waste to the legendary killer. Not surprisingly, Biguang quickly dodges the attack and hits the guy in the torso. As the guard dog falls to the ground, our hero charges at the rest of the assassins, yelling for them to get out of his way. As the fight begins, Biguang thinks about how he lost everything to these people while training to become an assassin. He stabs the first guy as he thinks about losing his body, and he slits another killer's throat as he remembers losing his childhood. When he also remembers the family that he lost, he gets stabbed in the back by another attacker. Biguang turns around with the knife sticking out of his back and looks at the culprit responsible. Consumed by rage, he attacks her and proceeds to massacre the rest of the assassins. Unfortunately, even after doing this, he realizes that the same people who took everything away from him have now come to take away the only thing he had left, which is his life. That's when Buddha suddenly appears once again, holding a gun to Biguang's forehead. They're now the only ones left, and our hero reminds the monk of his promise to let him live like a normal person. He reminds the evil bastard that he promised to let him have his life back after his final mission. Buddha admits that he made such a promise, but claims that he's giving him the opportunity to do that now. Hearing this, Biguang is confused, so the monk leans closer to him and reminds him that all humans must die in the end, and this is what it actually means to live as a human. After hearing him say that, our hero sighs in defeat as he accepts his fate. The monk then proceeds to press the gun against his head, and prays to the merciful God to save them as he prepares to pull the trigger. Before Biguang is killed, he vows to get his revenge, even if it's going to be in hell. However, the thought is interrupted when he hears some people telling him to open his eyes. Biguang opens his eyes to see that he's in a hospital, and surrounded by a bunch of police officers of all people. They're all just as surprised as himself, but what really gets their attention is when he calls them coppers. The female officer among them wonders why he would address them in such a crude way, and the other officer reminds her that the doctor said he might have short-term memory loss. The female officer loses her patience and calls out to him, addressing him as Kim Kyung-soo, and urging him to get his act together. Our hero is still very confused and asks her who she's talking about, and the girl replies that she's talking to him. At the same time, the other officer just gives him his ID in a mirror so he can see the reality for himself. Our hero reads the information on the card and finds out that somehow he's now a policeman working at the Ilsan police station. It's all very confusing, and as the other officers watch him act weirdly, Biguang is bewildered to see that a legendary assassin like himself has somehow reincarnated into a police officer of all things. That's where the next chapter starts, and now that this legendary killer has been reborn as a police officer after being betrayed by the organization, he's supposed to be plotting his revenge against Buddha and his cohorts. Unfortunately, that isn't going according to plan, because he's too busy getting slapped around by senior officers. The officer slams Biguang and insults him as he looks to the side and sees his partner on the floor, who's probably being bullied as well. So, I guess you're all wondering how he got into this situation. Well, to find out the answer, we'll have to go back to the day he got reincarnated. Biguang looks into the mirror and sees an unfamiliar face staring back at him. The other officers inform him that he had previously tried to kill himself, and they're the ones who brought him to the hospital. His female colleague scolds him for attempting such a thing, and the other officer tells him that he only survived because the rope snapped when he tried to hang. Biguang finds out that he's been unconscious for a week, and the female officer starts scolding him again for his actions. She calls him an idiot for thinking that writing the names of the bullies in his suicide note would solve any of his problems, but our hero doesn't even know what she's talking about. The angry policewoman then explains that he wrote a suicide note and mentioned the names of the other senior officers who were bullying them. This is where the scene shifts back to when Biguang got slapped, and we see Senior Officer Chialman, wondering why the newcomers are so bad this year. He walks closer to our hero and insults him, reminding him that his parents committed double suicide after committing a crime. Chialman pokes him in the chest, asking him why he tried to follow in their footsteps. That's when Youngchin chimes in, suggesting he's the son of a criminal who became a police officer. The bullies berate him for writing their names in his suicide note, and tell him that if he wants to die, he should do it quietly. Chialman raises his left hand again and tries to land another mean slap on Biguang's face, but this time, the junior officer catches his hand and stops him. Youngchin can't believe his eyes, and Chialman is just as shocked. He asks Biguang if he's gone insane to do such a thing, but our transformed hero is not having any of his bullshit. Chialman then calls out to the female junior cop kneeling on the floor, Jo Jong-hee, and asks her to confirm if what his junior is doing is an act of rebellion. But she tells him that she can't even see what's going on, since she's kneeling with her hands held behind her back, and her head bowed to the floor. Just then, Youngchin creepily offers to help her up himself, touching her hair in a weird way. Seeing this, our hero just sighs and curses at the senior officers, feeling disappointed that the police force is also a pathetic mess. Even though his hand is still firmly in Biguang's grip, Chialman tries to intimidate him for talking ill about them. Not surprisingly, the former assassin isn't taking any more crap from the bullies, so he squeezes the guy's arm some more till he starts to scream in agony. Joe quickly gets up, and is just as surprised as the other guy seeing the newcomer punish his senior. Chialman demands that the junior officer let go of him, but the former assassin just hits him back with only 2 fingers. The result is clearly disastrous, because the senior officer's eyes turn white, and he collapses to the floor. His brother, Youngchin, becomes very worried seeing this, because Chialman is out cold, and when he tries to intervene, Biguang pushes him down to the floor in front of the other junior officers. Our hero then unleashes the finishing blow by stomping on the senior's crotch, and from the look on Youngchin's face, it's pretty obvious that the pain is beyond excruciating. The man turns red, as bodily fluids start to exit all the holes in his face. The other officers watch as he screams in anguish, and even start to feel sorry for him. After Biguang takes out the 2 bullies, Jo stares at him in horror as she realizes that he's openly rebelling against the superiors. The scene shifts once again, and the next thing we see is the senior superintendent, Choi Jinha, yelling at our guy to get out of the police force. Looks like the boss is disappointed to hear that police officers were fighting against themselves, but I'm pretty sure that's complete bullshit. Meanwhile, Chialman is held back by the other officers, because he wants to get back at Biguang for humiliating him. Youngshin, on the other hand, has had more than enough beating for one day. He's still holding his crouch in pain and tells the other officers not to let him go because he doesn't even want to fight anymore. The superintendent continues scolding our guy for hitting his superiors, firmly believing that the junior officer did it because he thought he wouldn't get fired for his actions. As the boss rants and threatens to make sure that Biguang never wears the police uniform again, my dude just stands there with a very bored look on his face. He probably doesn't even care if he gets fired, but the superintendent wants to make sure he punishes him, so he tells him to get out of his office. Later, Biguang goes outside and sits on a bench, feeling a bit unsure of what next to do. A mother and child see him and are somehow excited to see a police officer on duty. Biguang overhears them and wonders how police officers are actually trampling on people's faith and abusing their power. After that, the scene shifts back to when he was punished by the superintendent. The other junior officers join him, and once again, the girl begins scolding our hero for what he did, asking him if he's gone mad. However, he doesn't seem bothered by his actions at all and explains that he was only defending himself. One of the other officers asks him if he's forgotten that the senior bullies have a backup, which is the fact that their father is a deputy assistant commissioner. Of course, Biguang has no idea what that title even means and expresses his confusion, so the officer explains that someone of that rank has a flower on his badge, which is a symbol that signifies high-ranking officers. After explaining this, the two colleagues just tell Biguang to get home safe in a very weird way, and tell him that they'll miss him, suggesting that his actions are going to have some very severe consequences. Initially, Biguang was a bit confused, but now sitting on the bench outside, he finally understands that everything points back to the corruption in the police. He believes that it's the same reason they could never catch assassins like him, because they're already rotten from the inside. Our hero just sits there thinking about how a flower in police badges is equivalent to a star in the army, and wishes that he would at least be reborn as a high-ranking police officer. The little kid overhears him thinking out loud, and asks her mom what a copper is. I mean, it's a pretty archaic and crude term, so of course the kid wouldn't know. Anyway, our hero looks at the police hat, and remembers how he was also an outcast in the assassin organization. He remembers the first time he met Buddha, when he was just a homeless kid standing in the rain. The monk took him in, and groomed him to become a legendary assassin with no equal. And when he was done with him, he shot him in the head with a gun. This is when the memories from Kim's life also flash in his mind, and he sees when the poor bullied officer tried to kill himself with a rope. A while later, Biguang goes back home and looks around Kim's room. He discovers that the young man was abandoned by his parents, and also abandoned by his organization. They also both face death after getting betrayed by their own people, which makes our hero realize that they had something in common after all. Later that evening, at the Gyeonggi-do Province Seabu Police Department, the senior superintendent General Hong Jun is going through some files when a hooded man attacks him in his office. The guy threatens to stab him in the neck with a pen, and asks the senior officer that they have a little chat. Hong Jun asks the person who he is, and the man reveals that he's Biguang, the legendary assassin. After that, the two of them have a chat and try to catch up. But Hong Jun doesn't believe that the legendary assassin died and suddenly woke up as a police officer. The senior superintendent, with multiple flowers on his uniform, points out just how unbelievable the story sounds, and Biguang tells him that he's not asking him to believe him. Rather, he's threatening him, and the officer has no choice but to comply. And after saying that, our hero offers to help with the sweep of a certain operation on a criminal syndicate. Hearing this, Hong gets more suspicious and asks the man to be truthful and reveal his real identity. But you see, he was simply trying to distract our guy while calling for security with his phone under the table. Unfortunately, the buzzing sound blows his cover and nobody even answers the phone. Biguang then tells Mr. Hong for the last time that he isn't here to ask for any favors. It appears that he has already taken out all the officers within the vicinity, which makes him confident enough to tell the senior superintendent that he's threatening his life. This story is already off to an incredible start, and I want it to be known that it was recommended to me by one of my viewers. I'm glad they brought it to my attention, as it has been an absolute pleasure to narrate it. For now, I plan to release daily videos on this manhwa, and if the response is good, I will make sure to cover it all the way to the latest chapter. So, if you want to see more, make sure to like the video and ask for part 2 in the comments below.